Hello, everybody. Hello to all of the fellow travellers in the world. I'm Helen Taylor, and welcome to Inspired Radio series You Are Supernatural. I'm here with you for conversations and stories that awaken something within us and to contribute to the creation of a new world. My story explores past lives, karma, auras, energies, demons, dimensions, timelines, and quantum possibilities. We're going to venture beyond what we've been told is real and discover what else is possible. Through my experiences, I've learned a lot. And actually, it's really difficult when I go to start recording the show. I've got a trillion things I want to say. And I've got to just kind of dial things back a little bit because, gosh, if I hit you with a trillion things at once, I don't know what would happen. So I've learned that we are supernatural. I don't have a doubt about that anymore. My experiences, my life, the stories, the programs have helped me to understand I am supernatural, right? I'm your guide. That's what I'm here for. There's a purpose for me on this planet, and that is to guide others. And that's why I had to start telling my story and getting it out there. It's energy, right? It's energy. And my story is just reminding you of your story. And energy is just reminding you of your energy. And, it's like we're all just tapping each other on the shoulder and saying, hey, wake up to the fact. Come on, join me in creating a new world because that's what I'm doing. And I'm just recognizing that in everyone else and asking everybody else to start creating a new, beautiful world. So, today we're going to investigate stories and programs. So, 2 weeks ago, when I started this, we looked at programming. We looked at starting to read through my book, book I wrote, My Return to Love, and we were looking at programming and the whole concept of marriage even being a program that we get caught up in. Last week, what was it about trauma? I started talking about trauma because I started talking about my childhood. And again, it was about programming, right? My dad was programmed. He was programmed by his mum. And he then started to instill that program into me. It's a bit like a virus, isn't it? It's a bit like, think about it as computers. We get programmed on how to think and how to behave, and then we pass that programming on to others. We all think that that's just life and what it's all about. So my mum had programming, not just my dad. My mum had programming in how to deal with life and how to deal with things. And, she was instilling that program into me as well. But essentially, I was getting lost in it. Like, we are born into this world with no programs, right? We are a spirit, we are a soul, we are light, whatever you want to label that as. We're this incredible creative power or energy that gets born into this body and mind, into form. And we're here to experience. We're here to learn and experience who we are. And we get caught up in other people's programming. And for some of us, we get trapped in it and we think it is us. And, for me, last week talking about the trauma, I started recognizing that everything that my dad told me and everything that my mum didn't say were all contributing to who I was starting to identify with and who I was becoming pretty sure that I was the one that caused problems. I was the one that was messed up. I was the one that shouldn't be here, all of that sort of stuff, right? So dad's programming, mum's programming were forming me. And I was identifying with that form and forgetting who I was and where I'd come from and starting to identify with what everybody else believed about me. And that's how we drop into form, so to speak, and start to behave that way and reinforce it. So let's continue on with what, the story was. I left off last week at getting to the point of the trauma of bedwetting. What a place to start this week, right? Really sorry about that, guys. But, this is reality, right? Right in our face, warts and all, right? But I'm doing this because I really want to start to reveal to you bit by bit how I have gotten to a point where I am detached or I've removed myself from being identified with form. This body and mind is not me. I take care of it and I take good care of it. Um, I'm not it. I am consciousness embodying this mind and body. I am not the programs that I've been talking to you about. The whole process of these stories that I'm telling you started to unravel and unplug myself from that programming. A beautiful thing when you tell your own story, as I'm telling you now from another dimension. Writing it is one dimension, thinking about it is another dimension, talking about it is another dimension. As you tell your story, and because I'm just reminding myself, I had a client during the week and I got her to just go a little deeper into her story and tell me, your story is showing you the way. It's an incredible thing, right? We just see pieces of our story, but when we start putting the pieces together, and that's what she was doing, just in 1 hour, she was starting to join the dots and see the cycles in her life and realize that the 10-year-old and the 20-year-old, they were all preparing her for the next stage, the next version, the next experience. Every story is like it's like an arrow in a bow, it's getting ready to pull, release you off into the next chapter of your life. And when you start to put those pieces together, where you are right now starts to make tremendous sense. And it actually helps you to fall a little more in love with yourself, um, because you start to value what it is that you did in the past instead of seeing it as oh gosh, that was when I messed up, or that was when I was broken, that was when I was depressed, or that was when I was addicted to something. Instead of seeing it as that, you actually start to own it and realize that, oh my gosh, I needed to go through that to become this, who I am now. Isn't that beautiful? So that's As I tell you my story, I'm also sharing with you the dimensions of what I've learned along the way about myself. I am not the story. I am not the past. I'm not that. And I was listening to somebody, actually, it was a Shaolin monk the other week, and he talked about the concept that if we had no past, there is no karma. Isn't that an interesting thought? So, with that in mind, this is why I'm doing this. I want to give you the insight I learned along the way to start, detaching myself and being the observer or the consciousness, having a look at these stories and starting to recognize how I was caught in stories or caught in programs, and I was capable of pulling myself out of them and moving on. So let's keep going with that in mind, okay? The trauma of bedwetting. And before I start that, I just had another thought. All through my childhood, I learned through my father's programming and my mother's programming not to trust my body. Right? That I wasn't the authority of my body, that my body was broken and it did things that were wrong and needed fixing, and that I had to go to other people, doctors and specialists and things like that, to fix what was broken. So I realized only just now that it was programming that was teaching me not to trust my body, not to listen to it. And I suppose that means you don't listen to your instincts as well. Just a thought. The trauma of bedwetting. Bedwetting coincided with urinary tract infections, UTIs. Mum said I would get them over and over again between the ages of 4 and 10. Mum did the usual thing and took me to the doctor. She was bewildered because she would say that every time she took me to the doctor, the infection would stop. They got the bedwetting mattresses. I don't know if they still do them these days, but they did generations or decades ago. The ones with a bell. As soon as the mattress got wet, the bell would go off. How embarrassing, how humiliating. I hated it. It did nothing, but it did stop Dad's visits. Nothing stopped the bedwetting, and now it was becoming a bigger problem because I was even having problems actually holding on during the day. There were a number of times at school when I wet my pants, when I wasn't quick enough to get to the toilet or when the teachers wouldn't let me even leave the classroom. There were also times when I just didn't make it home in time. It again was embarrassing and humiliating. Back to the doctor I went, and then to the specialist for some awful and embarrassing procedures and x-rays, then finally to the surgeon. I went through so much, and at the age of 10, in September of 1971, I went to hospital and had a major operation. The bilateral reimplantations of ureters. You see, both urethras were broken away from my bladder. This meant that when I got the signal to pee, I had to immediately. There was no way to hold on. The doctor couldn't say how it happened. He said I could have been born that way or it could have happened as I grew. I remember being in the hospital. It was St George's Hospital in Kew, which at the time was not a hospital for children. I was an exception. I remember going into surgery. The surgeon asked me if I had any questions, and I did. Could he show me the knife he was going to use? Crazy. Kids, we're just crazy, are we? He agreed and asked me to start counting back from 10. I never did get to see that knife. I remember waking up in the hospital bed after the surgery. I was in a ward right at the end of the corridor, and down the corridor I could see the nurses' station. As I came around from the anaesthetic, I started to feel awful, like I was going to vomit. So I used the buzzer. I could see the nurses, they were talking to each other, but no one was noticing my buzzer. I started to panic. I was going to throw up, and I had to get their attention. And that's when this lady appeared next to me, next to my bed. I hadn't noticed her until now. She never said a word to me, but she just made me feel calm. The nurses arrived, and I never gave that lady another thought. Now let's fast forward to 25 years later. I'm sat at the kitchen table with Mum, and we're going through lots of old photos. I came across a photo of a woman with a young boy, and I asked Mum who it was. Oh, that's your dad and his mother Jean, she replied. I was stunned. This was the woman who visited me in the hospital. I told Mum that I'd met her and that she was the woman next to my bed when I was in hospital. It couldn't have been her, Mum said. She died before you were born. I had never seen a picture of my dad's mother until then. It was definitely her. She was the woman from the hospital. In total, I was in hospital for a few weeks, with many more weeks at home recovering. And only this year I started to research that particular operation that I had. And to my surprise, the guy, the surgeon, this is how crazy our consciousness is. I remember his name, Dr. Robert Fowler. And he was in Parkville, his rooms. The rooms are now just apartments. But I went back and I researched that surgery. And do you know that in the 50s and 60s here in Australia, it was a very common procedure that children were having this type of surgery because their insides were messed up. That's just my unmedical way of explaining it. But, things were broken. My urethras were broken from the bladder. They weren't connected. Something had made them disconnect. And as the doctor said, or the specialist said, they couldn't quite, be conclusive about that. But it was a very common procedure being done on lots and lots of children. And from a surgeon medical point of view, they all thought they were pretty fantastic. It was kind of cutting edge surgery, it was new stuff coming out, and they were all having a great time patting each other on the back. But for me, on the other hand, I was like, why did so many children need this surgery? Just a little bit of a side note, right? Okay. So the next part of this chapter is called The Obedient, Compliant Child is Complete. Can you see the full picture yet? Let me set it out. By the time I was 10 years old, I was convinced that I was useless and worthless. I was a mistake and didn't deserve to be here. In fact, everything that went wrong was my fault. That same thinking was now going to form my behaviour and the future events in my life. I was caught in a program that reinforced this. Okay? Don't get me wrong, not all of my childhood was bad. Dad was rising up through the ranks of Alcoa. He was a salesman and a very good one. Mum enjoyed raising us kids and running the household. She loved her weekly games of tennis and took us to the church every Sunday. Dad wasn't very kind to her, though. He would torment her. There were stupid things he would do to make life difficult for her, like removing the home telephone and taking it to work with him so she couldn't use it, or withholding weekly housekeeping money so she couldn't buy groceries. She would have to go to the neighbours and work things out. That the way I saw it, he treated her no better than a slave. Who does that? Who the hell taught him to treat her that way? He was also very good at using the silent treatment on her. I watched him doing it many, many times, and it was something that I learnt to use as well later in my life. He would block her out by refusing to talk to her, and he also abused her. I heard it and sometimes even witnessed it. One time he caught me outside their bedroom door, and boy, did I pay for that. He was careful with Mum just as he was with me. He always spoke softly so no one else could hear, and he always tried to do things when no one else was around. His abuse of her was awful, and I many times wondered why she put up with it. Little did I know that I would find out why for myself later on in my life. Here's my little insight that I have. When you live with trauma, even emotional and mental abuse, you believe it is normal. How crazy is that? I thought that mum and dad's relationship was normal. I thought that the way dad treated me was normal. At that time, I had nothing to compare it to. Hmm? Can you see the programming? Right? I don't know who taught dad how to have a relationship like that. I would probably suggest that he watched it happening with either his own mum or dad, or once his dad died, his mum and whatever partners she had. He learned it. He absolutely learned it. And he knew how to manipulate, absolutely knew how to manipulate. And the silent treatment and cutting off, taking away things like the phone for mum, money, those sorts of things. I mean, us kids were learning that that was normal behavior and that's how relationships operated. Childhood was one blunder after another for me. Dad taught me that I had to navigate the expectations and orders of adults. From him, I learned how to behave and how to handle it. When Dad told me off when I did something wrong, I was sent to my room. Years later, I would remember the space inside myself that I created that was there where I would retreat to, far away from the cruel and harsh outside world. What I'm talking about there is when he would send me to my room, I would withdraw within myself. And in that deep internal space was a North American Indian man. He had brown skin and long dark hair. I would go to him whenever I was abused or in trouble. He never spoke. We just sat in silence together, and his presence calmed me. Can you see the supernatural things that are starting to happen in my life? They're just starting to turn up, like the woman standing next to me in the hospital that happened to be my grandmother, paternal grandmother that I'd never met. She died about 4 years before I was born. And here we are now, you know, I'm withdrawing into some internal world, which I'd now see as a dimension, a spiritual dimension. And there was just this wonderful, North American Indian guide like man who was just sitting there calm. And I would just sit there and be calm with him. I was finding a space away from this horrid world that I'd been born into. So whenever I couldn't cope and deal with it, I'd retreat into that space within me. Fascinating, isn't it? Right? Like this was setting the scene for what I was going to do further on when I got into spiritual work and I started in, the New Age path. I got into North American Indians and studying what love meant and energy meant and the heart meant and those sorts of things. It's always setting the scene. There's clues all throughout your life. It's quite incredible. So let me just do one more little page here. The world of primary school begins. Primary school was something else for me. Now I had adults who were kind and were encouraging me to speak up, the total opposite of dad at the time. Can you see that? Can you imagine that? We are amazing as children. We are resilient, we are strong, we are courageous. It's like no matter what's been done to us, we still get out there in the world and start to, do what everybody else is doing, even though for a lot of us, we're carrying some pain and some trauma and misunderstandings and all sorts of things. So here I was stepping into school and going, oh my gosh, now all the adults that are around me are all nice. It was really weird. This was so uncomfortable. I was embarrassed to have attention focused on me. At home, this sort of attention meant being made an example of. I was so confused and painfully shy. Whenever the attention was upon me, I would go red in the face, thinking I was being made an example of again. The teachers were trying to help me, guiding me to learn and grow. It was so foreign to me, and my instant reaction was to feel threatened and anxious. I loved swimming. I was really good at backstroke, and I swam in individual and relay races. I was placed into a competition, and the first one was held at the Harold Holt Memorial Pool. I remember being so excited, and I had the biggest butterflies. It went well, and I came second in the individual. It was during the relay that it happened. There were certain words or phrases that Dad used that would trigger me. I heard him clearly from the sidelines, and he got inside my head, and I froze. So this was in the middle of the relay. I never finished that race, and I never swam competition again. After I recovered from my operation, I got to have some girls over for a sleepover for my birthday. I was so excited because this had never happened before. It was rare for me to have any friends over during the day, let alone a sleepover. So again, looking at starting primary school and starting to get into the arena of sport, like in our family, my brother played football. My two younger sisters played softball. For me, I started in the arena of swimming and I loved swimming. But as soon as I had that one terrifying event with Dad, he just had to cough at the side of the swimming pool. Amidst the crowd of people and parents that were all around it, I would hear that cough. And that cough, it was like loaded with you're worthless. It was like just a program. It triggered a program that was already instilled in me. And during that race, like I said, individually, I came second. But during that relay race, I froze. And again, that was humiliation and that was embarrassment. And I couldn't get over it. So it was easier to give up sport, to give up doing those things than to try to navigate it. I didn't know how to navigate it. I was a kid. I was a kid and I didn't know how to push through it and I didn't know what to do with it. Programming, programming, right? This mind and body, the more I've learned about it over the years, imagine like I see the mind as a hard drive of a computer, and all the programs that we are taught are like putting a chip in, another chip of how to think, how to behave, and how to act. And how do you overcome that? I didn't know that at the time as a child. I didn't even know that as a young adult. It was something I learned along the way on how not to identify with what I now call the lower form of who we are. Mind and body are the lower three-dimensional form of who we are. And then we've got a higher dimension, a higher realm of who we are, which is consciousness or spirit. And we can operate from either one. But my dad, particularly, was teaching me how to operate in the lower realm, in the three-dimensional realm. He was teaching me how to operate out of the mind and body. And the mind and the body are limited to five senses. And that's the problem. It's what seems to happen to the majority of us as we're children. It still does. The programming disconnects us deliberately from source, from the consciousness that we are. drops us into form, gets us to really anchor into believing we are just the mind and the body. And then we're only using our five senses and we're not using our sixth sense or beyond. And if we're only using five senses, then we're focusing predominantly on the outside world, not the inside world. Like I said before, I'd lost touch with my body. My body was, it was just like it was this foreign landscape and it was broken. I mean, doctors and specialists were confirming it. It wasn't working properly. And let me go back to my mum and my mum's programming through all of that, because I had to start to come to terms with that. When I started to look back at all of this, I could see why dad behaved the way that he did, right? When I started to talk to his stepsister, when I started to find out about his mother and his childhood, I was starting to grab little pieces from here and there to figure out why he was the way that he was. He was pretty broken. He was really pretty broken. And, I started to get some insight into that, which was handy, right? As I said last time, I wasn't excusing him for what he'd done, but starting to understand how he was treated, how his mum would treat him, how the stories that his stepsister would tell me was starting to make some sense, I suppose, out of the way he behaved. But my mum, on the other hand, right? You know, she was a woman that said from the ages of 4 to 10, many times throughout my life after that, she would repeat that statement from the years of 4 to 10, you had urinary tract infection after urinary tract infection. And you could hear, it was like her intuition, some part of her was trying to figure out what was that? It was telling her something, but she just couldn't figure out what it was telling her. Years later, I could have told her something was wrong. When you're being interfered by somebody else, it's a chemical thing that happens. But every time she'd take me to the doctors, they would stop. Just little pieces I was starting to understand. So, for me, I always wondered why she didn't go a little further into just investigating that, following her instincts a little more. But then when I started to understand the relationship she had with my dad behind closed doors, I realized that she had taught herself to turn a blind eye to what he did to her and what he did to me. And I can't excuse that either. I don't excuse that. I just needed to understand how she was wired and programmed and how he was wired and programmed. I was just trying to figure it out, not to excuse them both, but each little dimension that I started to investigate and understand about them, I didn't realize at the time was helping me just pull back from the story, just pull back from the trauma a little bit, right? It was starting to rewire me in a better way. I was starting to get insight. And as you get insight into your story, as you get insight into who you are, you start to automatically connect with something greater, piece by piece, just piece by piece. Every time I looked at the stories that happened to me from different dimensions, I was disconnecting from them. I didn't know that at the time, but I was. And as I was disconnecting from them, I was reconnecting with Source. I was reconnecting with who I truly was, piece by piece. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. So next week, we're going to get into the seance. I think I just talked about that, having the girls over for a sleepover. And the next part is a seance and how, what happened there. What happened there. Just incredible. Just incredible. But you'll have to wait till next week, won't you? Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. I hope you've got some insight yourself. I hope you're starting to realize you're not the programming. You are something much more extraordinary because you are supernatural. We are. That's why I'm telling these stories, right? It's time. Tap everyone on the shoulder. Let's start operating from that perspective, from that dimension, not this story, trauma, broken dimension. Because right now, we're shifting. We're shifting at a rate of knots into that new world and out of this old world. If you would like to talk to me about your story, like the girl last week that, I did the session with, and by the after 1 hour, she's just saying to herself, I didn't see that before. I didn't connect with that before. Telling your story helps you to fall deeper and deeper in love with yourself. And you start to recognize why you're here. It's all wrapped up in your story. All wrapped up in your story. So I hope you've enjoyed the session today. The session. God, that was creepy, wasn't it? I was sounding like the practitioner. Take that hat off. I'm a storyteller. I'm a storyteller and I'm here to wake everybody up with the stories. And if you would like to talk to me about your story, please just reach out. Give me a call, send me a message, whatever. But in the meantime, just, I hope, take a step back and have a look at your life and the week ahead and how it all rolls out. Start looking at it from a different dimension. And I look forward to connecting with you again next week. My love to you all.